Now you might notice that in this particular scene, their breath is quite visible in the cold. And as a Canadian who's lived in Edmonton, Alberta for most of my life, I found myself wondering why this wasn't the case for most of the film. One of the promotional points that the director frequently brings up is that they were actually filming in extremely cold weather.
When word got out, when we were casting this, and I said I'm going to shoot the whole thing practically, and there were 4 companies that wanted to make this film. 3 of them refused to let me do that. But the performances, their skin, their breath, it wouldn't have been the same. Actually, Riley's scene when she shot it was, what temperature was it?
Like -7.
Yeah. And she got to be on the ground just looking pretty, like the rest of them were screwed.
Now, to anyone even remotely familiar with cold weather, the fact that you can't see their breath for the vast majority of the film gives the impression that it wasn't really that cold at all. I did some research and found out that breath is pretty much guaranteed to be visible anywhere under -5 degrees Celsius. While I was in Vancouver, I was able to film my breath anywhere up to +4 degrees Celsius. The absence of visible breath in this film alone is really not all that big of a deal. I mean, there's no real shame in not being able to control the weather. So what, it was unexpectedly warm during the time period that you shot this film, no big deal, right? Well, that's what you'd think, but Adam Green does not want to let this one go. Apparently, it's very important for him to be able to say that it was super, super cold the whole time.
The whole movie was done practically. There's nothing on a soundstage. They're really up there. They're really freezing. So in some scenes, you can see their breath like dragons almost. And that's because this was early on in the night. But as the night would go on and their body temperatures would drop and they would really start freezing, there's no more breath. And so we would sit there and say, all right, well, do we need to pull layers off of them? But the problem wasn't making them colder. It was trying to make you guys warmer so that your breath would show up. One of the things they would say is, you could tell that they're not even really up there and they're not cold because you can't see their breath, which is exactly the opposite. When you can't see their breath, that's when they're
reaching
really,
hypothermia.
yeah, they're about to die. That's why you can't see their breath.
That's right, folks. Adam Green says that the only reason you can't see their breath for most of the film is because it was even colder than the scenes where you could see their breath. Now, right away, this explanation struck me as a little odd, particularly because there's nothing to back up this scientific claim on the entire internet, and that the only other mentions of such a phenomenon even existing are from people who are basically just quoting the director. So naturally, I decided to investigate. Turns out a normal human body temperature is 37 degrees Celsius. And mild hypothermia is at 35 degrees Celsius. So in the commentary track where they literally say it's because they were reaching hypothermia, is that supposed to imply that a mere 2-degree difference in body temperature would result in breath not being visible? So even if we're supposed to believe that you were giving your actors moderate to severe hypothermia every day of shooting, that still would not be enough of a drop in core temperature for breath not to be visible. Now, I'm obviously no scientist, so I asked around to see if I could get someone else to comment on this. My roommate recommended I reach out to YouTuber King Crocoduck, who is a graduate student with a bachelor's in physics from UC Santa Barbara. King Crocoduck responded by saying that if your body becomes cold enough for the air you're exhaling to be invisible, you're basically dead. Despite already confirming my suspicions, I decided to go one step further. I did some digging and wound up getting in contact with Dr. Gordon Giesbrecht, a professor at the University of Manitoba that specializes on the effects of cold weather on the human body.
So you basically trash people's movies, is that it?
Yeah, his explanation, both on the DVD commentary and on Twitter, he's been tweeting about it, he says, the reason why you can't see their breath for most of the movie is because it was so cold that the actor's body temperature dropped after a few hours of shooting, and you can't see their breath because their bodies were so cold.
No, that doesn't make any sense at all. Well, first of all, it's very unlikely that on a regular basis their actors were actually getting hypothermic.
Mm-hmm.
But even if they did, they would be non-functional if their temperature dropped more than a couple of degrees. That would be making the suggestion that if you're breathing 37-degree air out of your mouth, you would see condensation, but if the air was 35 degrees, you wouldn't see condensation, which is just not the case, especially if you're making the argument that the people dropped their temperature a couple of degrees because it was so cold outside. It works against the argument. If you see condensation in one part of the day and no condensation later on in the day, it is not because the body has cooled, it's because the air is warmed up.
If you're interested in learning more about Dr. Gordon Giesbrecht's work, feel free to visit ownthecold.ca and coldwaterbootcamp.com.
To me, it's really a minor. I mean, guys should just say, well, we weren't actually putting people in a situation for 3 days where they were freezing, so
Yeah.
and we can't control the weather.
Yeah. I know. It's like, it's not that difficult.
Like, why argue about it? I wouldn't argue about that.